So the Victorians, they were the ones who started the idea of having distinct varieties rather than land races, and they bred their varieties by selecting out what they thought were the best ears out of a land race which was a diverse population. Because when you do that, if you pick out the best ear, you can end up, and multiply that up, you can end up with a higher yield than the mixed population in a land race. So this is one of the early varieties. This is Squareheads Master, which was selected in the 1860s and was grown right the way up until the 1950s. It is higher yielding than the land races like Red Lammas, slightly stiffer straw, also shorter, about 130 centimetres rather than 160, and produces lots of straw though, which was what the Victorians wanted for high farming. So Victorian high farming, Norfolk four-course rotation, you keep lots of animals, they produce lots of muck, that enables you to grow more crops. If you're growing more crops, you can keep more animals. So building fertility that way. This is Little Joss, about 120 centimetres tall, so slightly shorter than Squareheads Master. This is a very important variety because this is one of the first varieties that was produced by breeding, so hybridising two different varieties of wheat together. So this was a cross between Squareheads Master and a Russian variety, Gurkha, and the cross was done to introduce better yellow rust resistance. So Little Joss again, this was bred in 1908, and then we have Yeoman from 1916. Now what was happening around this time, around 1900, was the work of Gregor Mendel was rediscovered. So Gregor Mendel was working in the 1860s, he was a monk in what is now the Czech Republic, and he did the experiments with crossing wrinkled peas and round peas, and he discovered the laws of inheritance. He was working at the same time as Charles Darwin, who came up with the theory of evolution. They were aware of each other's existence, but unfortunately they didn't put their ideas together, they didn't correspond, and it wasn't until 1900 that Gregor Mendel's work was rediscovered in Cambridge, especially by William Bateson, and the term genetics came about. So genetics came about by the synthesis of Mendel's and Darwin's ideas. So once you've got the theory of natural selection, then you can explain that by using Mendel's ideas. And around in the early 1900s, again in Cambridge, Rowland Biffen wrote a paper saying that genetics could be applied to wheat breeding, and thankfully he put that into action, and two of his varieties were Little Joss and the Yeoman that we've got here. So Yeoman is a very important variety because it's one of the first practical examples of genetics being used to solve a problem. So Rowland Biffen had written a paper that he thought that genetics could be applied to wheat breeding, and then he applied it to this particular problem. And that was that the Squareheads wheat that British farmers were growing predominantly since the 1860s was low in protein and very soft and not suitable for roller milling and for making well-risen white loaves of bread. To do that, the millers much preferred Canadian imports, hard red wheat. So what Rowland Biffen did was to theorise that the quality of the Canadian hard red was genetic. So he grew Canadian hard red, Red Fife, in the UK, and found that it still produced better quality. So the quality was genetic and not environmental. And then he crossed it with a type